Well, hello there. I have probably about 20 minutes before my son wakes up to film this video, but the story has been on my heart for a while now, so I want to get it out as best as I can, but as quick as I can. So we're going to jump right into it. By the way, if you are new here, my name is Alicia. I live overseas with my husband and my 1-year-old son. Here I share content just about my journey, life overseas, life in my 20s, life in general. So if you're interested in following along for the journey, subscribe and welcome. So if you were to have read my journal entries from the ages of 18 to 25, honestly, you probably would think that they were written by someone who was mentally insane, and that's probably because I was, to a certain degree. My whole life growing up, I thought I wanted to be a doctor, a neurosurgeon to be exact. I loved the brain, I loved how it worked, and I, all throughout my life, pursued things that would take me steps closer to being a doctor. So in high school, I did the medical track. At my high school, you could pick different tracks. So I did the medical track, and I took college classes in high school so that when I got to college, I would be like already 2 years ahead. By the time I got to college, I declared that I was a biomed major, and that's where things went downhill. I remember being in orientation at college and everyone had to choose their major, like declare on some form what their major was. And I remember the person saying, if you don't have a major yet, that's okay, like just put that you're undecided. And I remember thinking to myself, like, I can't imagine being here without knowing what I was here for, like without having a major. Like that was the worst possible scenario in my mind, because having a plan gives me certainty. I thrive on having a plan, knowing what's next, knowing the future. And so when I started taking classes in my biomed field, because mind you, I was already 2 years ahead. I had already done most of the prerequisites and I was already taking my biomed classes. That's where I started to realize that the physical aspect of medicine is that wasn't me. That's not what I wanted to do. Like, it was so far from me, and my peers seemed to be doing like so well, and I just felt this wasn't for me at all. And simultaneously, I was also going through a spiritual journey where what I had previously believed up until 18, 19 years old was kind of being flipped on its head by this one religious group. If you haven't seen that video yet, you can go check it out after this one. But I started getting involved with this religious group that basically believes everything opposite from what I previously believed. And so while my career path was crumbling, my spiritual path was also crumbling. I felt like people had lied to me my whole life. And on top of that, I started realizing what this whole 9-to-5 life and the American dream was all about. And I realized I didn't want any part in it. I hated the 9-to-5 life. I hated having to work in order to survive and being able to just go on vacation when someone told you to. I hated just doing things just to make money in order to sometimes enjoy your life. Like, I just felt like something was so wrong and so broken with our system, and I wanted no parts in it. I made the decision to drop out of school. And that was a big decision. I'm the firstborn in my family, one of the first generations to go to college right after high school. And so for me, it was a really big decision, but it was something that I had to do in that moment. Now, granted, I was also dabbling in illicit activities, and so I really believe that this clouded my judgment at the time, because now looking back, I can see how the Lord was leading me in different ways to maybe make other decisions that would have, but we never know. So that's all in hindsight. I just know that dabbling in those illicit activities clouded my ability to make sound decisions. Fast forward, I end up moving to California a few times, and I actually end up in Kansas at one point with the religious group that I had mentioned before. It was there that I started to question if this religious group was even legit. So then I end up moving back home. I end up getting into a relationship that really wasn't for me. I also end up starting to pray this one prayer, and it was for God to just send me a mountain that I could go to and just hear from him. I just wanted me and God time for an extended period of time. Now granted, this is in your 20s when you actually can make those decisions because you don't have usually a spouse or children depending on you. So thank the Lord I was in a season to be able to pray a prayer like that. And so eventually he ended up giving it to me. I ended up being flown out to Hawaii, given a place to live, and literally ample time just to study the word for myself, spend alone time with God, hear from him, and gain a sense of purpose and direction on my life. I was not intertwining with the Mary Jane anymore. I was just so focused on figuring out what the Lord's will for my life was. And so I finally gained a sense of clarity. I learned that the religious group I was a part of was not legit. I learned that it was not scriptural, not biblical at all. I started to feel like I was being led into education. So I moved back home. I started substitute teaching, and then from there I got a job working as an assistant teacher with students with disabilities, and this is where I just fell in love with teaching. I had previous experience working with children before, and I always knew that I wanted to do something with education, but I never knew how much I would enjoy teaching. That job that I was working actually paid for me to go to school to be a teacher. At that point, things definitely weren't perfect. I was still in that relationship that I wasn't supposed to be in. I still had some uncertainty about how the future looked, but I at least knew my spiritual purpose, and I had a direction career-wise. I feel like those are the two things that without, I just was not able to function in normal everyday life. Like, I literally before then lost my mind. I was so crazy. Like, if you ask any family member during that time, like the things I would say and talk about, I actually, like, I was one of those space cadets that was like, free your mind from mental slavery. I'm pretty sure I have a picture of me standing on the side of the street holding up a sign that said, free your mind from mental slavery, which, I mean, it's a true statement, but having those two things solidified really gave me a sense of purpose and direction. Now, my advice to anyone going through a quarter life crisis, it usually involves a loss of purpose, a loss of certainty. My advice to you is not to find your joy, your happiness, and your peace and your contentment in certainty. Find your joy and your peace and your contentment in the Lord. And that sounds so arbitrary, but there are things that God gives us that we know for certain in His Word, and that's serving His body. So find joy in serving. Find joy in doing the small things that He's called you to do. Find joy in seeking Him, and have faith that eventually the plans will unfold. Just know that your identity and your joy is not in those plans. It is in Him, and He is with you at all times. Therefore, joy and peace and contentment is accessible at all times. And I guarantee you that there are things in that moment in time that you are in that God is asking you to do. It could be a small thing, it could be a major thing, but my biggest advice is just to do that thing. do that small thing with a radical attitude. If he's asking you to get rid of some things that aren't serving you, do it. If he's asking you to quit something, do it, and trust him. Find joy in the trust, because he is a good father and he's sovereign. Like, his plans are actually good for you. He knows what's best for you. So any step that you're taking in obedience to him is going to produce fruit. Whereas currently you were living in unfruitfulness, so he wants you to move forward. That's my biggest advice for you. We are people, beings created for purpose, and when we're living in purposelessness, it really affects our mental. We lose our minds. And so yeah, I think in your 20s, especially in our self-aware generation, we can't handle not knowing what's next. I think we have to learn how to find peace and contentment with just knowing Jesus. Now that I am 29, I am married to the person I know I'm supposed to be with. I am living in my purpose. I can confidently say I can look back and see all of the ways that the Lord was leading me and all of the ways that I was not listening. And I know that that was a major source of my crisis. I can see all of the decisions that I made kind of without him, mainly my career choice and my dating choices. I can just see all the things that I did on my own. And I didn't even know back then to pray for God's will over my career or even dating. Like, I just didn't know that I could pray those things. And so when you make decisions on your own, it tends to not work out well. The thing that gives me the most sense of peace and security is knowing that every decision that I make is so prayerful and so intentional. Even the smallest of things, like where we're gonna move when we had to move out of our apartment, and that may not be small to some people, but yeah, like the small things I seek the Lord's will in. The big things I seek the Lord's will in, because I know the chaos that comes from doing things on your own. That is my story, and that's my advice to you. I hope this has been insightful in some way. I'm actually here to talk to anyone going through a quarter life crisis, either in the comments or over at IG. If you want to follow me there, it's Earth to Allie. And I think that's all. And I can hear my son waking up. So I'm gonna go. See you in the next video. From my soul to yours.